In today's video, we have lots to discuss, including all kinds of action from the World Junior Championships. We had all the quarterfinals yesterday, including another big upset. Team Canada is ousted again from Czechia. We'll discuss the fallout from that, plus the other results. We have news from the NHL waiver wire. We have a couple of signings, one in Toronto, one in Boston. Could NHL veteran Jonathan Toews continue his career and kind of make a comeback? And if so, what teams could he possibly end up with? Plus, could we see a significant deal between the Vancouver Canucks and the New York Rangers? One NHL insider seems to think that two centermen could be swapped for each other, maybe including some other pieces. We'll discuss the details of all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss here today. We had a few news items that I put a video out a little bit earlier. In case you missed that, there was a small trade between the Penguins and the Sabres. It was Colton Poolman for Bennett MacArthur. Both minor leaguers, nothing too significant, but a swap nonetheless. And we had a couple of signings as well, with the Toronto Maple Leafs announcing today they've extended defenseman Philippe Myers on a 2-year deal at $850,000, and we also had the Boston Bruins extending bottom six forward Mark Kastelik on a 3-year deal at $1.5 million. Obviously, I think both players have been a good fit in their new teams. The Leafs certainly, I think, appreciate what Myers brings, appreciate his size and physicality, but he's been used sparingly so far, only appearing in 11 games, but there was reports in the past week that the Leafs and Myers were working on a extension, so this isn't shocking news, and we knew that the Bruins were quite pleased with Kastelik, of course, who was included in that big trade between the Bruins and the Senators this summer, which saw the focal point being Linus Ullmark going to the Ottawa Senators, and of course the Bruins got Kastelik along with Jonas Korpisalo and a draft pick coming back. So Kastelik's been a good fit there. Has pitched in a bit offensively and has found more of a groove and consistent play with just the hard-nosed play, the physicality, and things that he struggled with in Ottawa. He certainly found it in Boston and has been a great fit there. So good to see. We also got news today from the NHL waiver wire with the Toronto Maple Leafs claiming Dakota Mermis, who was on waivers from the Utah Hockey Club. Of course, Mermis was originally a Maple Leaf and was claimed by Utah a few weeks back. So now that he's back on waivers and the Maple Leafs put in a claim to take him back, nobody else put in a claim. So because of that, the Leafs are able to reassign him to the Toronto Marlies of the American Hockey League and not have to keep him on the NHL roster. So that's the intent in the first place that they wanted to do, and they got him now back to where they'd hoped. So in that scenario, they're able to do that. If another team had put in a claim, they would have had to leave him on the NHL roster if they would have been the successful team to make the claim. Now, as I mentioned, the World Junior Championships are getting further along. We're now down to the final 4 teams. The medal round's not far away. Tomorrow will be the semifinals, followed by the finals on Sunday. Of course, we'll see the 2 gold medal and bronze medal matchups on Sunday afternoon and evening. But certainly the quarterfinals brought us lots of intrigue and lots of, I guess more frustration for Team Canada, which we'll get into here in just a second. I'll get to the other results first. The U.S., of course, dominated Switzerland, one of the big 7-2 win. James Hagens, Ryan Leonard, Danny Nelson all leading the way with multiple points in that game. Sweden wins a nail-biter over Latvia, 3-2. The Latvians made it close. They had a heck of a tournament. They were a lot stronger than most people ever thought, and they made a lot of games more interesting, including that upset victory over Team Canada. Eric Matejko, of course, who's the local player for me here, playing in the St. John Sea Dogs, not far from where I am in the QMJHL. Washington Capitals prospect as well, 19-year-old, had a heck of a tournament for Latvia. He scored majority of their big goals. He certainly looks like he's got a bright future ahead. And, of course, the Latvian goaltender, Feldbergs, made another big performance, including 47 saves. He was not drafted, but he's going to be getting opportunities and offers, I am sure. He was phenomenal in this tournament and certainly grabbed a lot of attention for sure. We saw Team Finland beat the Slovaks 5-3 as well. Kupalainen and Nurmi both with a multiple goal affair for the Finns to take the victory there. And as I mentioned, the other, part of me is surprised and part of me is not, but Czechia knocks out Canada for the second consecutive year, a 4-3 win, another late goal, late in the third, in the final minute on the power play this time. Same thing happened last year. Czechia stunned Canada with a late goal. This one came a little bit earlier. I think this one was, I can't remember how many seconds were on the clock. There was around, I think, close to 40 seconds or something like that, maybe 38. Whereas last year it was down to like 22 or 23 or something like that when Czechia put the puck in and stunned them. This year to me was a little bit more predictable. I thought last year's group had more potential. Of course, we knew from the beginning, as soon as the team was announced, there was all kinds of people that are, somewhat experts on the scenarios here, dealing with junior players that knew this team wasn't going to be good enough. Team Canada's brass and head coach made numerous baffling decisions. And just, I don't know, Team Canada needs a complete revamp here, in my opinion. The Canadian players continue to be undisciplined, again, taking untimely penalties, which certainly helped Czechia get the victory. Early in the game, Cole Baudouin was given a major penalty in a game misconduct, which I completely disagreed with. That hit, if you watch it, it was called for kneeing. And to me, he went right through the center of the body. There was no head contact. No knee contact either. Like, it was really weird. The Chechen player, number 17, I can't remember his name, but he went down. He sold the call. Now, was he hurt? Probably a little bit. It was an awkward collision. I'm sure it wasn't like a complete sell job, but you could tell he was laying on the ice, looked like he was half dead, and he thought his night was over as well. And then, boom, they get the major penalty. They review it. I'm sure they factored in the injury. When he finally got off the ice, he goes down the tunnel, and then he comes back. And because it's a 5-minute power play, he missed the first couple minutes of it, but then he's back on the ice. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? I mean, come on. But to me, it wasn't a penalty. If you really watch it and you know your rules, I mean, I know the standard, the IHF is a little different, but to me, it's not a penalty. It's a bad call. And then late in the game, the power play goal that gave Czechia the win, Andrew Gibson get called also for a 2-minute kneeing penalty, which I'm surprised it was 2 minutes, because if you look at that hit compared to the Baudouin major, that was a very, very similar hits. And I'm like, okay, I was worried that was going to be a major too, even though I didn't think either should be, and I'm not really convinced that either are even a penalty, period. But to me, the fact that they called Gibson a minor and Baudouin a major, like, does that say that they kind of maybe, didn't agree with their own call? I don't know. It just was bizarre. Bizarre officiating. I'm not blaming the refs in this case because the Canadian players needed to score more at the end of the day, and they couldn't. But it's one of those things where the team struggled, and then they got some bad breaks on top of that. It's just compounded, made it worse. I honestly don't think it made enough of a difference though to cost them the game. I mean, it's just one of those cases where, like, when it rains, it pours. That's just how hockey goes sometimes. But at the end of the day, I think the Canadian team could have won, but they didn't get the job done. It's just that simple. Easton Cowan had his junior teammate Oliver Bonk on a 2-on-1 set up for a tap in, wide open net, and he chose to shoot. I don't know, trying to be the hero. Wasn't happy with him in the tournament. I thought that his performance wasn't great, but at the end of the day, as we all remind ourselves, these are just kids. They're all 18, for the most part, 18, 19-year-olds, some 17-year-olds. I don't blame them. At the end of the day, I blame the Canadian management and the coach for their baffling choices. Dave Cameron canceled multiple practices and morning skates, and when he was asked about it after the tournament, he said it's because they were exhausted. I'm like, what? You didn't have to travel. You had teams traveling across the ocean to be here. You have the Ottawa Senators dressing room in the Canadian Tire Center, so you have the best access to the facilities than anybody else in this team or tournament because you're hosting it. You're playing the same amount as everybody else. If everybody else is continuing to practice and everything, why are you not? Like, exhaustion to me just seems like a lame excuse. I really can't see that at all. When management was asked if, now that you know the results of this, would you do anything different? They said no. They said they were happy with the team that they picked, and they thought they picked a good mix of skill and 200-foot players, and trying not to have all just skill. Basically, they didn't want to have just skill. They wanted players who could play multiple ways, multiple roles, and which is kind of funny because defensively and like penalty kill wise, special teams, they were horrible. So not only did they not take the best players and left multiple best players at home, including Misa, Seneca, Perek, Yakimchuk, Crystal, and probably a few others, But on top of the players they did pick, didn't do the job on the PK and the roles that they were given. So, the only real power play quarterback defenseman they had on the team was Sam Dickinson, and he struggled, and there was nobody there to really take his place, and he didn't even get that role until they finally took Oliver Bonk out of that spot. Just mind-boggling decisions from the coaching staff. I'm like, what are you doing? Porter Martone and Carson Raycroft, the top duo in the OHL. Great, both of them, terrific goal scorers and played together and have great chemistry. Didn't see a shift together. They were rarely in the lineup at the same time. I'm like, what are you thinking for a team that struggled to score? It's just mind-boggling. There's easily a half dozen players that probably shouldn't have been on that team if you're really just picking by the best players. Special teams didn't work well. Just a lot of things were done poorly. I don't blame the players. I really think that the players tried their best. They gave it their all. They did the best with what they could do. A lot of this falls on management for selecting the roster that they did, and a lot of it falls on coaching for making mind-baffling decisions. I've liked Dave Cameron for a long time. He's been a coach for a really long time, coached at all kinds of different levels, and for the most part, I thought he's had a great coaching career and been a good coach, but I think it's time for him to maybe give it up, because the decisions he made in this tournament just completely numb and mind-boggling. So that's my rant on Team Canada losing. But the Czechia team, they were good. They knew how to beat Canada. I don't think Canada, even if they would have won this game, I don't think they would have won a gold medal. I don't think there's any way they would have beat the Americans. I don't know that they would have beat Sweden either. The Finns, they had beaten earlier in the tournament. Maybe the Slovaks, depending on how the matchups went. But I don't think there's any way they were getting past the Americans. I think the Americans are likely going to take the gold medal, but I think Sweden might be the best team to give them a rival there for it. We'll see. Sweden plays Finland in one semifinal matchup. The U.S. plays Czechia in the other. So especially if we see the U.S. demolish Czechia and Canada couldn't, it's just another reason to show why Canada can't keep up with the Americans. Like they need, all those years ago, like this is the first time that they've lost in the quarterfinals in the history of the tournament, like from back-to-back years. They need to, back in, was it the 80s, they had like a big summit and came up with like the program of excellence, and they had revamped everything. I think they're in a predicament where they need to do the same thing again. I also think it might help if they actually had full-time coaches and not just pulling guys from their club teams as well. I think they can go about things a lot different and have a completely different strategy here. So we'll see. The state of hockey in Canada is still at the pro level in great hands, but at the lower levels it's not, which means that over time, Canada's not that big Goliath anymore on the international stage that they once were. Although a lot of other countries have caught up and surpassed, which is not shocking. It's bound to happen, especially when you look at how much the game has grown internationally, but it's at a time now where I think Canada has lots of talent. It's just a matter of how it's used and how it's played and how they strategize. So we'll see, but certainly a very interesting tournament. And like I said, this is something that a lot of us predicted as soon as we saw the rosters. Like, yeah, they're not going to be any further ahead than they were last year. It's just mind-baffling decisions by the ones in charge. But I don't want to see people from Canada hating on the players on their social media, leaving hateful comments or anything like that. You can have your opinions. That's fine. I think the players know they didn't play good enough, but for the most part, they did their best. It's not their fault that they were put in that predicament. If you think other players should have been picked on the team like I do, and you think that other people should have had more of an opportunity, I think that as well. But hating on the players that were there is not going to change or solve anything, and it's not right. So make sure that you change and keep the opinions for the ones making the decisions at the end of the day. They're the ones that need to own this, not the guys on the ice. Now, as I mentioned, other news around the league, there's some reports that Jonathan Toews, longtime NHL veteran, multiple-time Stanley Cup champion, might be interested in a return. Of course, we discussed the other day how he conducted an interview with GQ magazine and has detailed his healing journey, you could say, where he spent 5 weeks in India. Apparently, he's feeling as better now than he has in years, and he's very curious and interested about kind of going back to the NHL and continuing his NHL career. He never did announce his retirement and doesn't really feel that it's completely over. Frank Zaravelli discussed this on the Coast to Coast program the other night on Amazon Prime, discussed that again today on his own show, and was saying about teams that were linked that he believes have some level of interest in talking to Toews. We don't know for sure if he's going to try to make a comeback this year. For him to compete in the playoffs, he'd have to be on a roster before the NHL trade deadline. Or could it be something he continues training and targets next year? That part's not quite clear just yet. But Jonathan Toews, according to Sarah Valley, there's some levels of interest, and some of it could be just curiosity to talk to him to see where things are at. From the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Winnipeg Jets, of course, which is his hometown, and the Colorado Avalanche. All those teams looking to add down the middle, which is where he always played. And certainly, it's curious to see how much gas he's got in the tank, how much can he provide. He'd be a player they could sign instead of giving up a bunch of assets. So, of course, they're curious to look at it. That's all we know right now. It doesn't mean that other teams won't get involved, and it doesn't mean that he's for sure going to sign and for sure going to be a major difference maker. All we know is that teams are curious because of his past history and his resume. Time will tell. Sarah Valley also did make another interesting suggestion, wondering that if one of these teams, for example, or another team does end up signing Jonathan Toews, with the Red Wings where they are in the standings right now, would they consider trying to bring Patrick Kane to their club as well and reunite Toews and Kane? We know Kane probably would love to get back into a playoff picture. Of course, wasn't in the playoffs last year upon returning with the Red Wings. So, at the end of his time in Chicago, he missed the playoffs a bunch. Got to go with the Rangers briefly. And then, of course, signed in Detroit. And then here we are again after re-signing in Detroit, that it's not looking too good for them to get in this year. So clearly a situation that it's just an intriguing fantasy thought really by Sarah Valley. Doesn't mean any teams are seriously talking about it, but something that you have to think that it might cross their mind. Something fun to think about here as, early January, long before the trade deadline approaches. The Vancouver Canucks are going to be without starting goaltender Thatcher Demko again. Of course, he missed the first part of the season, missed quite a bit of time with that rare and unusual injury somewhere around his knee that he was dealing with. And obviously last night's game had an awkward, little bump or collision. I'm not really sure how to describe it. It looked innocent enough, but defenseman Noah Juleson was coming to the front of the net to take his man, and they kind of clicked skates. It really wasn't like a hit or a collision. It's just kind of weird. And then Demko ended up going down hard. He did leave the game. He didn't come back, and he is going to be out for at least a while. They've recalled Shelovs from the minors. Lankinen's going to play in the next game here. So, of course, we don't have any updates, but the Canucks are going to be without starting goaltender Thatcher Demko again for a period of time. So they've already without Hughes. They're already without Pettersson. Of course, we're going to talk about them here in a minute again for a potential trade that's been rumored. And they're kind of up against it with a lot of key injuries. Not a great time. They have kind of had a very much up and down record here as of late and kind of hovering right around that last wildcard spot. Not exactly where they hoped to be based on their performance last year. But as I mentioned, the Canucks have been heavily in the rumor mill, getting all kinds of play and talk and about everybody talking about Pettersson and Miller. Yesterday, of course, we talked about some of this as well and where things could end up. Nick Kypreos, an NHL insider as well, on his show with Justin Bourne, was talking about how he feels, and he's not the only one to mention the New York Rangers and JT Miller. I know Paul Bidzonette also said he's heard from multiple places that the Rangers really want to try to get JT Miller. We had heard about this even a number of weeks back from other sources as well. We know the Rangers and Chris Drury are likely going to make significant changes, or at least they're trying. Basically all the reports we've heard says that they understand that they're probably not going to be able to get back into it this year, and that the changes they're going to make is kind of aimed more at the future. So clearly, the team needs a shakeup. I think that's more than fair to say. And Miller has been somebody that they really covet. So with that in mind, Kypreos suggests that the trade that very well makes a lot of sense for both sides might be JT Miller for Mika Zibanejad. Now, there could likely would be other pieces involved, but you've got Zibanejad and Miller, very similar age, very similar contract. They both play center. And obviously, I don't know that Miller really needs a fresh start. I don't think that's fair to say. I think he's happy in Vancouver, and I think he's been productive. Now, this year's not quite gone as planned, and I know that his production's not where he would like it to be or the team was hoping it would be right now. But certainly, in the past, he's been quite very, very productive and, a big part of that club. Now, Mika's also struggling right now. His numbers are down. So it's a case, two assets that are normally very productive and very big parts of their team. Things not going well. Could we see a swap? Now, the Canucks could consider this for a variety of reasons. Now, Miller has a no-move clause. Mika has a form of trade protection in his contract as well. There's been different reports that Kiprio says he thinks Miller would only waive for the Rangers. That's the only place he would go. Otherwise, he's happy to stay in Vancouver. He likes it there and really isn't looking to move. We know that the Canucks appear like they really want to get this whole Miller-Pettersson thing settled based on the comments from GM Patrick Allvin in the Sportsnet article the other day. We've heard this numerous sources that the team is really just done with everything and they want to get it sorted out. So it's going to be interesting to see where things go here. But certainly JT Miller to the Rangers for Zibanejad, and like I said, there were some other pieces likely being involved, whether there could be picks or another player. It's interesting nonetheless. I mean, we'd also heard that Mika Zibanejad would supposedly has a couple of teams that he would be willing to waive for as well, because he's got trade protection in his contract. And there's some belief that Vancouver might be one of those teams. We know Vancouver has a long history with Swedish players. They've got the Sedin guys, brothers there that still work for the club. I don't know if that plays a role in anything. But Zibanejad and Miller, at least from an age and contract perspective, it makes sense. Completely different types of player. They play the same position, but they don't play it the same way at all. Of course, Miller, a lot more physical, a lot more, demanding of his teammates, which ultimately is kind of wearing here. And some people were kind of accusing Miller of bullying Pettersson, if you will, basically saying that, he's been super hard on him and Pettersson's kind of shut it down and is not responding well to it and has created a major rift between the two players. Bo Horvat, of course, the former Canuck captain, current New York Islander, he spoke out and he said he's been teammates with both of them, obviously, and had good relationship with both. But he was asked basically, with all the rumors about Pettersson maybe being available for a trade. All he said, of course, he can't really say too much, but he said that he loved playing with Pettersson, and if the opportunity presented itself again for them to be teammates, that he would love that. That's all he said. So again, there was rumors about a similar kind of situation between Horvat and Miller, and that the team was kind of forced to pick between the two. Now, there was also a situation where they were forced to pick about contract because they're both due for new contracts. And as much as Horvat was having a career season, it seemed like a lot of people felt that Miller was still the better player to try to win with, and ultimately led to the Horvat trade. And it's not everybody was thrilled about that, but that's ultimately kind of part of how things went down. So I don't think there's really any reason to think there's anything bad or bad blood between Miller and Horvat of any sort, but there certainly was a choice between those two players at the time. So Horvat might kind of understand to some degree what Pettersson's going through. I don't know, but do you see a trade between the Canucks and the Rangers working out where the centerpieces are Miller and Zibanejad? There could be other pieces involved. Let me know what you think each team has to put in there to make it worthwhile so that the teams would actually pull the trigger and get it done. Do you think both players would waive and move their trade protection in order to make that happen? There's some belief that they would, but of course, we don't know 100% because we don't know exactly what the players are thinking if they were asked about this. So let me know your thoughts on that big trade as well as all the other news, the World Juniors especially. If you're Canadian, what do you think Canada needs to do to get back on track? Certainly lots of baffling decisions there, plus some signings today, waivers news, and lots of others, including Jonathan Toews' possible return. Very newsy day. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.